the most shocking thing someone confessed while on their deathbed. I grew up hearing this tidy little family story. My dad had been adopted as a baby by my grandparents from a woman in their church who got pregnant out of wedlock. It was always framed as this beautiful act of generosity. My grandparents couldn't have children. This young woman was in trouble, and they stepped in to give her baby a good home. Clean, simple, noble. My dad never really made a big deal out of being adopted. It wasn't some hidden shame or anything, just a fact of life. He was raised with love, had a stable home, and looked up to my grandpa like any other kid would. But even as a kid, I remember thinking he didn't look much like either of his parents. He was tall and dark-haired, with hazel eyes, while my grandpa was short and sandy blonde, and my grandma had pale blue eyes and curly auburn hair. It wasn't a big deal, just one of those things you sort of notice and move on from. Fast forward to a couple years ago. My grandpa got sick, pancreatic cancer. It moved fast. He was gone within months. I visited a lot during that time, partly because I genuinely loved him, and partly because I could tell my dad was struggling more than he let on. Watching the man who raised you fade like that, it does something to you. A few days before he passed, I was at the hospice with my dad. It was late, the place was quiet, and I offered to let my dad sleep on the couch in the family lounge while I sat with grandpa for a while. My grandpa was barely conscious most of the time by then, but every once in a while he'd have these weird bursts of clarity, like the lights flickering back on just for a moment. That night, he turned his head, looked at me, and said clear as day, "Have they told him yet?" I asked what he meant. He blinked slowly and whispered, "It should come from me." He dozed off again, and I didn't press. The next day, he was fading in and out again. But when my dad went to get a coffee, my grandpa motioned for me to come closer. I sat down next to him, and he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Then he said, "Your dad? He's mine." I didn't get it at first. I thought he meant like symbolically. I said, "Yeah, of course, he's your son." But my grandpa shook his head. "No, he's mine." Then he told me. Back in the late 50s, there was a young woman at their church. She was single, quiet, pretty. She sang in the choir, taught Sunday school, helped organize bake sales. My grandpa was a deacon at the time. She confided in him a lot, said she felt invisible, said she didn't think she'd ever be a wife or a mother, said she felt like God had forgotten her. My grandma had been struggling with infertility for years, multiple miscarriages, some bad, some worse. My grandpa said their marriage was tense, but they kept up appearances. Somewhere in all that, things happened. He didn't go into detail, and I didn't ask, but the result was that the woman got pregnant. It was a huge scandal risk at the time. She wanted to keep the baby, but she also knew she couldn't raise him on her own. And my grandpa, who apparently couldn't live with the idea of his own son being raised by strangers, convinced her to let a loving couple adopt him. That's how my dad came into the family. Nobody ever knew, not even my grandma. She thought she was raising a stranger's child, when really she was raising her husband's. I sat there frozen, listening to this man who'd always been the image of upright morality, telling me something that completely upended everything I thought I knew about our family. I asked if he was sure he wanted me to tell my dad. He nodded slowly and said, "He deserves to know. He was always mine. I just never told him." And then he fell asleep again. He died the next morning. It took me 2 weeks to tell my dad. I went back and forth about it. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to drop this nuclear bomb on him while he was already grieving. But I also kept hearing Grandpa's voice. He deserves to know. So I sat my dad down and told him exactly what I'd heard, word for word. I watched his face go blank, then pale, then weirdly soft. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just sat there for a long time and then said, "I always wondered." Apparently my dad had done the math years ago. He knew he was born in May of 1960. He knew the story was that his birth mom had gotten pregnant in early 59. But something about the timeline, the way his parents had never spoken to her again after the adoption, the way Grandpa always looked at him with this quiet intensity, it had raised questions, but he had buried them, out of respect, out of fear. After that, he started digging, quietly, without fanfare, found an old church directory, tracked down the woman's name. She had died 10 years earlier. No marriage, no other children, but she had left behind letters, journals, notes. He got in touch with one of her nieces, who confirmed that she had spoken of a child once, long ago. She hadn't said who the father was, but she had said she knew he'd gone to a good home, that he was safe, that he was loved, and he was. He really was. My dad talks about it sometimes now. Not often, but when he does, it's not with bitterness. It's more like he's finally reading the last page of a book he's been carrying his whole life. He still calls them his parents, still says he had a good childhood, but I know that part of him will always carry that strange double truth, that he was both adopted and not, that his father lied to protect him, and maybe to protect himself, that a quiet woman in a small town church gave up her child for a reason no one will ever fully understand, and that the truth, when it finally came, was like looking in a mirror and seeing someone else's reflection looking back. Some secrets die with people. This one didn't.